This morning we have a fantastic guest. It's Professor Kevin Warwick over there, and he's the first scientist in the world who managed to connect the brain with artificial intelligence. With no further talking, I'll introduce Professor Kevin Warwick. Thank you very much. Stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Just wait for my presentation to appear here. Whether I need to click. Anyway, what I'm going to be talking about this morning are more my experiments and what I've carried out, not only linking brains to the internet and brains to computers. There we go. Just a question to the, am I going to see this here so I know what? I will continue anyway. It's a once upon a time story, so motivation. This is me as a little boy a long time ago with my father behind me. And when I was very young, my father, although we were at a wedding there, he didn't get out much. And he didn't get out much because he had a problem called agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is this, you can't go outside anywhere. And it got so bad for him, he had to give up work, had to stop what he was doing, and it got worse and worse. In the end, he was confined to a single room. And I can remember when I was young, trying to get him to leave the house, and I couldn't do it. He was screaming and sweating, it just wouldn't happen. And in the end, they operated on him. He had a neurosurgical operation. As he described it, they drilled a couple of holes in the top of his head and cut out some of his brain cells. And quite amazingly, within a few months, he was okay. I mean, not only that, he was better than he was before, in that he would go anywhere, he would talk to anybody, he had no problems at all. And I was absolutely amazed at the time. There I was, 8, 9-year-old boy, seeing this complete transition in my father just through changing a small number of his brain cells. Now, I know there are some philosophers that say you take a brain cell out and it doesn't affect the brain. Well, I could see from first hand it can do. If it's the right brain cells, it can completely change your personality. Now, I skip forward. Here's my father with me when I was graduating, because from that introduction to neuroscience with my father's experience and things like science fiction movies such as The Matrix and The Terminator, you know, I'm a scientist, I'm also human, I watch those things and they inspire you into think, what's going to be possible with artificial intelligence in the future? So those sort of inspirations, and then I end up in a position as Professor of Cybernetics at Reading University, where potentially I can carry out some practical experimentation. And that really is what I've done. The first of the experiments, this is me with my doctor. Essentially, I went to my doctor and said, I have this little device that I'd like you to implant. And he said, okay, let's go and do it. So that's what happened. And what the device looked like, here it is. It's not the thing on the left-hand side. It's the thing on the right-hand side is what was implanted. It's a radio frequency identification device, RFID. So identification is the critical thing. And what it did was identify me to the computer in my building. So as I walked around the building, the computer knew it was me at different points, and it could do things for me. So as I walked towards the laboratory, the door opened automatically for me. As I went down the corridor, the lights came on. As I came through the front door, it said, "Hello, Professor Warwick." I mean, it was cool, it was great fun. And with being the first human to actually try the implant, of course, there are dangers associated with it. But in a way, that was part of the excitement, part of the learning from a scientific point of view. Now, I don't know now, with the same technology, does anybody in the audience have a cat or a dog who has a chip implanted? Anybody? There are, I mean, there are quite a few hands going up. Thank you very much for audience participation. You can feel happy that this technology was fully tested on humans before your animal received the device. And I was the first human to try it. But the things I thought from that, okay, the implant was sending, oh, just an interesting thing about the implant, we put it in my left arm. The reasoning being, because we didn't know how well it would work. As I walked through doorways, we thought, would it have to be at a different angle? So if we put it in my arm, I might have to walk through the doorway like that to make it work. As it happened, it turned out perfectly okay. But you'll notice if you go online, because there's a lot of people now that have RFIDs, always they implant it in their left arm or left hand. There's even in the film Casino Royale, James Bond has an implant and it's in his left arm. Why it's in the left, I've no idea, but for us there was a technical reason for doing that. However, what I wondered was, here was the implant sending signals to the computer to allow it to recognize me. Why can't we change those signals in different ways? Why do we just have to stick to a code that's identified? I've also been involved as a result of that with research into Parkinson's disease. Now, what that involves in terms of deep brain stimulation treatment is, as you can see from the picture here, the surgeon drills a hole down into the center of the person's brain. This is for Parkinson's disease in different parts of the brain, epilepsy, the same treatment, clinical depression. If anybody's feeling really down and the doctor agrees with them, maybe you can have one of these as well. But what it does for Parkinson's disease, there are about 4 or 6 electrodes on the end of this spindle, which is pushed down into the hole that the surgeon has drilled. And this applies an electric current into the brain to counteract the effects of Parkinson's disease. Now, I'm going to show you a video of someone typical. He has Parkinson's disease. This is a genuine guy. You will see how he is with Parkinson's disease. And then the assistants will inductively switch on the power packs. And then you'll see how he is with the treatment, with the electronic stimulation. And I have to just one thing. The power packs are positioned here. And because he's got Parkinson's on the right and the left, he's got 2 bunches of electrodes, 2 power packs. And this is one thing, a wonderful process of evolution, that as humans, we've got a lot of space here. If you do that on your chest, you can hear it echoing. There's not a lot of organs and body tissue in there, which is brilliant for technology because you can put all sorts of technology in there and it's not too much of a problem. So that's what happens for heart pacemakers, but also for Parkinson's disease implant. So here we are. Here's a guy before and after, you'll see.
In 2 minutes, what was the status of Mr. President when he was referred to us by his neurologist in Belgium, and you see him before surgery without drug, unable to stand up by himself. He's helped by Patricia Limousin, who's a neurologist in our group, and he's not able to do anything of, as he will tell you, makes your life living like normal. He's not able to walk. He has dystonia, which is muscular contraction, deforming the different joints, and this is the best he could do without the drugs, with the help of people around him and maybe his wife and friends. He was referred because the drugs were not working anymore. He was not having any more improvement, and as he will tell you, was just to start to wheelchair. This is after surgery. You see the tremor. We turn one of the 2 stimulators which were implanted in the electrode into these supranucleus, which is a tiny part of the brain. And you see that in a few seconds, the stimulation induces the stop of the tremor. This is still visible on the other side. We will turn on the stimulator on the right side, and you will see something in spectacular than that. You will see that the patient feels again free, and he set himself in his chair, and the physician went to the he will obey the correct and do some tests. If he feels that those tests are a little bit useless as compared to the feeling he has, he can do that almost on the right side, actually a little bit longer, as you say, and we'll show you on the other side. And then to walk, he's stood up alone. He's without the driver. You see him walking, turning. It was a few days before the Vienna meeting of Women with Organization.
Now, I'm working with surgeons in the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford, and what we're doing is using artificial intelligence with this. Essentially, the electrodes in the brain, we feed the output from them. They're also, as well as using them to apply current into the brain, we can monitor the electrical activity of the brain, and we feed that into an artificial intelligence system which can predict pretty accurately when the typical tremors and the muscle locking that you get with Parkinson's disease, when it's going to start. They can predict that before it actually starts, typically about 20 seconds ahead of time. That's purely by monitoring, having modeled parts of the brain, the subthalamic nucleus, the thalamus, the particular parts of the brain where the implant is. Artificial intelligence can then predict when the tremors are going to occur, so the stimulation is only applied when it needs to be applied rather than all the time. But the point is with this that the person's brain is linked to an AI system. And in fact, the AI system is not in the same, that the patient is in Oxford and the AI system is in Reading. So it's actually in a different town, and it's making a decision on what goes on in that person's brain, which is pretty important, I would think. Back to my own experiments, which is where we are here, given that as a background, I had a second implant. This was about 4 years after the RFID, the first one I described. This time it was something called the brain gate, and I, again, was the first human, this time to have the brain gate, which has been used a number of times since me. You can see there it's 100 electrodes, 100 spikes with very small electrodes on the end, and this was fired into the nervous system in my left arm. It took 2 hours of neurosurgery to make this happen because the surgeons were learning about it as well. But the idea was to link my nervous system, and my brain, to a computer and then onto the internet, partly for some therapeutic, helpful applications, but partly to look at enhancement. And one of those, to get straight into it, one of the things I was really interested in was, as humans, we're very limited in the senses that we've got. We have, if you like, 5 senses, but there's so much out there that we just miss out on in terms of ultrasonics and ultraviolet and X-ray. For example, there could be a super intelligent ultraviolet being here next to me, but none of you know. None of you can say, no, there isn't, because you haven't got an ultraviolet sense. I don't have an ultraviolet sense. But could we have, is the point. Why restrict ourselves to being the humans that we are at the moment? So, what I did have, not ultraviolet, but ultrasonic. On the baseball cap, you can see ultrasonic sensors. The output from those was fed down into my nervous system. So what was happening, as an object came closer to me, my brain was receiving pulses of electric current that increased in frequency the closer the object was. So bing, 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 and further away, bing, bing, bing. So experiencing an ultrasonic, what it means is you have a pretty accurate sense of distance to objects. Not in terms of, oh, this is 2.37 meters away, not that sense, but in the sense that if it moves slightly towards you, or you move slightly towards it, you can detect those changes very, very distinctly, very clearly, or if it moves further away. So much so, Ian there suddenly brought that board quickly towards me. You can see I had a blindfold on, so I didn't know, okay, my ears could hear, why not? But essentially, it was the pulses in my brain. When it was brought towards me, suddenly they increased, and it was very scary. It was like a reaction. Something's coming towards me, and I've no idea what it is. So that was one extra thing we could look at. It's something that could help somebody who's blind to give them a different sense. But, you know, we can all have extra senses. We can extend our sensory range, certainly in terms of ultrasonics. I was also interested, though, on our nervous system in our brains. You can pick up different emotional, the physical signs of emotions, like anger and shock, those sort of, not love, not the sort of abstract emotions, but the physical emotions. And I wanted to see, well, could we use that in a practical way? So my wife is wearing some jewellery that a student at the Royal College of Art in London put together, and the jewellery is linked to my nervous system via the implant. So essentially, if I was calm and relaxed, her jewellery was blue, as you see there, nice and calm. If I got excited, then her jewellery started flashing red. So let me set the scene for you now. She is in her office. I'm completely different place. Jewellery is blue. Right, he's not doing anything he shouldn't. That's fine. Suddenly it starts flashing red. What is he doing? And more importantly, who is he doing it with? So I don't know whether that was such a good idea. One of the more obvious helps of this type of technology, enabling people who perhaps have had their hands amputated, perhaps they're paralyzed, but could they use their brains to control pieces of technology? And that was something I tried out with a little bit extra. This is a picture of me in Columbia University. I know we have some of our American friends with us today. So this was taken in New York City, where in the real-time computing lab, they helped us put my nervous system live onto the internet. So I actually had an IP address, my nervous system. The main security was that we didn't tell anybody what we were doing until afterwards. But what we did with me in New York, USA, was link to a robot hand which was in England, in Reading, in my university. So as I moved my hand in New York, my brain signals, as well as doing that, as they're doing now, also operated the robot hand in England. There was about a third of a second delay, which wasn't too much of a problem. However, the robot hand has sensors in the fingertips, and signals were sent back across the internet to stimulate my nervous system with the same thing, the number of pulses. The more the hand gripped, so the more pulses I was receiving. And what I was trying to do in the experiment was to get the hand just to grip an object. So not too much, you know, the egg test, if you like, not too much, not too little. And I was able to do that. Essentially, I was trying to get the pulses, by operating my hand, trying to get the pulses to reduce to just about zero. So they're coming in very slowly. So it shows, for therapy, somebody who has an amputation or is paralyzed can control technology, but also can have feedback directly from that technology, which was what was happening here. For me, the biggest thing, though, is communication and the possibilities we have there. Because when you think about it, how humans communicate is pretty pathetic compared to technology. Even your PC that some people using here, how it communicates is much better than a human. I mean, we have highly complex signals in our brains, thoughts, feelings, images, all sorts of things going on in there. And if we want to communicate those to somebody else, what do? Well, we convert them to mechanical pressure waves. I mean, this is a terrible bottleneck for our, you know, if I have some thoughts, trying to get my thoughts across to anybody else, this is nothing like it. What I say is just a simple coded message which your ears will pick up with the pressure waves and then convert back to electrochemical signals. And of course, even if you've been married for 20 or 30 years, what are you talking about? I've no idea. Wouldn't it be much better if we got rid of this bottleneck and just communicated brain to brain? So we'd actually know what the other person's thinking about rather than have to try and guess at it. And being a guy, I always guess wrong as to what my wife's thinking about. Or so she tells me afterwards anyway. So that for me is the biggest thing. But in fact, my wife helped with this. She had 2 electrodes implanted into her nervous system called microneurography. And what we did was to link our nervous systems together directly, electrically. So when she closed her hand, my brain received a pulse. Ding, 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 ding. So what we were doing was communicating nervous system to nervous system telegraphically. When you think of the telephone, before that there was the telegraph. What we were doing was the equivalent. So really looking ahead, okay, we've got nervous system to nervous system. Clearly the next step from that is obviously brain-to-brain communication, where you're looking at people communicating by thinking to each other. But for that, we need to understand a little bit more about what we can do with brains and brain cells and so on. So, in this experiment, what essentially we've done is to take brain cells from rat embryos. Rats are never particularly popular, so you can take their brain cells and put them into this dish. You see the black circles there. The black rings are to try and stop these brain cells dehydrating, because the brain cells are living tissue. We have to feed them with minerals and nutrients. We have to keep it at the right temperature in an incubator and so on. And first of all, I find it quite amazing. We separate the brain cells using enzymes, and then when we put the brain cells in the dish, something like 150,000 brain cells. So it's nothing like the human brain of 100 billion brain cells, but 150,000 is quite reasonable. But the brain cells, as soon as they're in the dish, will start putting out what look like tentacles. And these tentacles link up with each other, and what brain cells do is communicate. Essentially, the brain cells start communicating. So after about 10 days, we have a complex little brain in the dish, where there are signals going through the brain. And we poll round, we try the different electrodes. If we stimulate, applying a positive, negative pulse, if we stimulate on particular electrode, let's say electrode 63, where do we get a response on the other side of the brain a very short period later? And we see where there is some sort of passageway through the brain, and what we do is give that brain a body, a little robot body. And I've got one of those robots here. So the brain is connected to the robot by Bluetooth. Bluetooth is a much better connection system than a spinal cord. It's much more safer. So hopefully we'll all as humans do that in the future. But this robot is like 10 days old. And what we wanted to do, simple experiment, is to move forwards, detect the wall using ultrasonics, and turn right. That's what we wanted to do. There we go. So that's what we wanted. It gets it right. Then it changes its mind, which it's not supposed to do, and turns round and crashes into the wall, which is not supposed to do. But this is just a baby robot. It's only 10 days old, and sometimes that passageway through the brain is excited by the sensor and the movement. Sometimes it's not. What happens, though, this is a process called Hebbian learning, learning by habit. Every time that particular passageway is excited, when it gets it right, that passageway strengthens a little bit. When one neuron fires, causes another neuron to fire, brain cell, that physically strengthens the connection between the two. And we can see that happening under the microscope over a period of time. This is the same for all humans. If you drive on the same route day after day, after a while you feel you're not even thinking about the driving, you're just doing it. Well, you are, but the connections through your brain are so strong, you're doing things due to habit. You're doing them a lot of things we do to habit. This is part of the problem with smoking and drugs. You've got connections in the brain that are so strong, you can't really break them by doing some other habit. It's very difficult. But here we can see it in the robot anyway. And what we're looking at are those learning mechanisms and how we can change them. For this robot, you saw how it performed after 10 days. This is the same robot, the same brain, and this is looking at it not after 10 days, but after 2 months. And what it has been doing is what we've just been seeing. For 1 hour every day, it's been doing that particular process. And so this robot has had a university education without paying for it. And in a way, this one, you look at it, it's probably a little bit boring. It gets it right every time. And, you know, this is the typical MIT thing. Look what we can do. They're not all this perfect. Sometimes they're a bit hesitant. Sometimes they still crash for a while because they're all a little bit different in terms of how they learn. But this is the sort of perfect example where those particular passageways are strengthened and it doesn't do anything else. This is what it does. And we can use chemicals to, for example, we can kill off part of the brain and then see if we can get other parts of the brain to learn how to react. A bit like if somebody has a stroke, we can try and do it, but we can add fresh brain cells or add stem cells to help the learning or add particular chemicals to enhance the learning, which maybe can be then done in human brains where we've succeeded with this little brain here. But if we look at the brain, I said 150,000 brain cells, we can also grow them in 3 dimensions. And we can also use human brain cells. And 3 dimensions, human brain cells, we're talking there about 60 million human brain cells in a robot body, which to me is quite significant. It's still not 100 billion, but really that's a case of technology. I think for 60 million we still need to give it a lot more to do. Just going around in a little corral is quite simple. But if you look at it, let's assume that in future we can increase to 100 billion neurons, the same as a human brain, then even though it's got a robot body, would we have to start to think about giving it rights? Would we let it vote in elections? And if so, would it be crazy enough to vote for Brexit? These are worries that we would have. Now, where does this get us all? Where does this lead us? Well, we've seen the capabilities for therapy, just like it helped my father when I was a child, a young person. So we can look at maybe helping stroke patients, overcoming the problem by adding fresh brain cells into their brain, or somebody who's blind to give them a different sense, like the ultrasonic sense. Or maybe even somebody who's paralyzed or somebody who's had their hands amputated to control technology. And indeed, this is what has happened. Paralyzed people receiving the brain gate are now able to control a robot hand and feed themselves and so on. But to me, it's much, much more. What excites me is not so much the therapeutic side, which is great, but is looking at enhancement. Possibilities when you link your brain directly with the internet, directly with artificial intelligence, what almost surely can be, we can do, but we can look to much more in the future. What we can do, yes, we can extend the range of sensory input. We've seen that already. But critically for me, the main one is communicating in a whole new way. By connecting our brains to artificial intelligence, sure, we can upgrade memory, we can maybe allow the AI system to sort out all our memory for us. We outsource it. Why should we do anything that in our brain? But the critical thing is communicating directly brain to brain. I mean, I firmly believe that thought communication is the way ahead for humans, and I'm excited to look forward to being one of those who will be able to do it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Warwick. It was absolutely great. Before starting a short Q&A session, I want to thank Raiffeisen Bank for this superb presentation. And if there are questions from the public, here you go.
Hello. So I know that several companies are working on creating an interface which is not invasive, which doesn't require surgery. How many years ahead, how many years are left until we see this kind of experiment that you did with this non-invasive surgery technology?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think there are a lot of people working on non-invasive, well, it's not implants with the technology. I mean, it's not my thing, first of all. That's not what I do. But I have experimented in that area. And really, you get very limited resolution. An electrode on the outside of the head is picking up an average signal from maybe 20 million or more brain cells. It's just a very, now with the brain gate, you're picking up, it could even be one brain cell or one nerve fiber. Typically, maybe it's 3 or 4 nerve fibers or brain cells. The electrodes are about 3 micrometers in diameter, and a typical brain cell would be maybe 10 micrometers. So you're down at the same scale. I mean, brain cells differ in size and things like that, but that sort of typical numbers. So you can get a very high resolution. So for me, that is so to sort of change your question, the answer would be, I don't know when more people would have that sort of an implant. At the moment, even I am a little bit scared of having a brain implant. You know, I would love to have one, you know, maybe to link our brains together so we can see what it's like to communicate. Because when we first switch the switch to connect 2 brains together, that's a scary thought, because we really don't know what the brains are going to do. We can theorize, we can say, oh, maybe, but until we actually do it, we don't know. But I would love to do that, but it's still dangerous. When you're doing some with the brain gate, did you know the risks? Well, no, you don't. You know some risks, but the surgeon said to me, if this goes wrong, if infection gets in, you're going to lose the use of your hand. And so I knew that beforehand. It was a risk, but, you know, I'm a scientist. I want to go ahead and want to do it. But some of the risks, that's a risk you do know. Some risks you just don't know. An infection and what it might happen in the brain is a big one. I don't see that externally it's ever going to get. It's like trying to have longer ladders to climb up to the moon. You know, I mean, maybe in theory it's possible to climb up to the moon by extending ladders and things like that, but in practice we know, you know, it's not going to get there. And that's what I feel. I just saw yesterday there's somebody connected 2 people's brains externally. It's interesting, it's not, but it's not going to get anything like we're talking about here, is my feeling, I'm afraid. So there's lots of good applications for EEG electrodes and learning what's going on in the brain, for monitoring activity for people with epilepsy. So I'm not saying it's not a good thing to do, but it has limited applications, I think, is my...
Professor Warwick, thank you for this very inspiring presentation. I would like to ask you to comment on two topics. It seems to be a long time between the initial research of this kind of medical application, at least, and the mass utilization of them, and also on the ethical implication of this kind of application that you have mentioned. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm surprised about the time it takes. Since, I mean, it was 2002 that I had the brain gate, and since then it's been used for some therapeutic applications to help people who are paralyzed and so on, successfully, I have to say, in the end. It's a learning process. But in terms of more experiments with enhancement, as far as I'm aware, there haven't been anyway. But so it's a disappointment that it hasn't happened, or more experiments of that type, even with that technology, because the technology is quite powerful. I think for the thought-to-thought communication, that technology would be fine for that. But those more extensive experiments haven't been done. It does seem to take an awful long time. I agree with you. I don't know what the answers are. I wish I did. Maybe there's commercial interests and people that can't quite see. To me, the ability to communicate by thought is enormous commercially, but it needs someone to speculate, and maybe, as the gentleman before, asking about electrodes on the outside. People are worried if you put electrodes into the brain, what the dangers are. The other part of the question, the ethics, for everything that I've done, I've got ethical approval that's been necessary. That has amounted to the hospital authorities saying, yes, you can go ahead. For the surgeon, it's more to say to the surgeon, you can do this. And then the university to which I'm attached has said, well, if they say it's all right, then that's all right. So actually having the implant, there is an ethical procedure, but it's all in terms of the medical profession and the particular characteristics of the technology and so on. And if that's all agreed, you can do it. The big ethical questions, that if I suddenly have a number of implants, I can communicate in a new way, I can control a robot hand over the internet that throws bombs at you and you can't do any, you know, the big power cyborg question, well, we don't really have any ethical controls for that. You know, if I wanted to create an Iron Man suit and do that, I can just go ahead and do it. And the same is true here. So there are big ethical questions that as a society we might address through meetings like this and through newspapers and, you know, outwardly have ethical feedback in that sense, but there's no official body. I mean, even there is the White House Commission on Bioethics that has been going for quite a few years now. I mean, my observation of that, it is as much political as it is in terms of societal, in that it's looking, you know, it's mentioned me by name and said, what is he doing all this research? We should be doing this in America. We're not doing it here, which is not the sort of ethics that I think we would be thinking about. Not whether he should be doing it or not, but it's which countries are doing it and should. So I think some ethical bodies are more political than ethical. I don't know whether politics comes into ethics anyway, so out of my depth in that one. Thank you.
Hello,
Hiya.
over here. Do you reckon that the brain, the human brain, is ready for a new stream of information? You used, you know, the computer, and your brain was quite overwhelmed by a new data, overwhelmed a little bit about new inputs. Do you think in the future the brain will be ready for connection with internet? Because now we have a problem with the Facebook or with the social media because it's overwhelming our life. So in the future, because it's a unfiltered stream of information, and your brain has to filter it in the same time of filtering the reality.
I don't know that I agree with you that the societal technology and is overwhelming the brain. I mean, I do think our brains are very mercenary. They're very good at sorting out what they want to do as to what's important and what's not. Brain cells like to communicate. So if there are new forms of communication, like Facebook and Twitter and so on, then to me it's pretty obvious that brains will much prefer to do that than to think about mathematical equations or to do, brain cells have, unfortunately, this is the result of genetical modification from how many millions of years, and brain cells like to communicate. So my feeling is, if they're given another port, and let's say our brains are linked together, and our brains are linked together, and brain cells will go for it big time. It will be a major change. It will probably change completely what it means for us. We will no longer have, the brains will probably say, well, why bother about, why bother about memory? Let's outsource memory because technology can do it better. We won't bother because we want to communicate. This is what we want to do. Brains decide what they want to do, no matter what we might want them to do. It's the same at night. If you say, I've got to go to sleep tonight, and your brain says, no way, you are not going to sleep, you're staying awake. And that's it, you just have to go with your brain. Or say, I'm not going to eat chocolate, your brain says, yes, you're going to have some chocolate. The brain inside you, which you sort of feel, well, you almost can't control your brain, is deciding, it will decide. Maybe you would be right, and maybe we connect brains together and the brain cannot cope. And it's, problems, and two people have gone crazy. That might happen. Or maybe it's the other way and the brain cells start to communicate that way and gradually build up and build up. There's only one way we'll find out, I'm afraid. It's like Dr. Jekyll with the potion. He had to take the potion, and then, I know that was science fiction, but, if you were Dr. Jekyll, would you drink the potion? Well, of course you would. You're the researcher, the scientist, the doctor. You want to find out the answer. And for him, it didn't go well. And this might be the case with this experiment, and people will say, what an idiot to think that. Of course, it's obvious it doesn't work. Or it might just work. So we will find out.
One last short question.
Sure.
Okay, I understand from your presentation that you're seeing the brain and artificial intelligence as somehow complementary.
Yes,
okay.
Very much so.
Scientists like Stephen Hawking or others, they said about artificial intelligence right now that is more like a replacement for the humans than
Yes.
complementary. What do you think about it?
Well, I mean, it is. Artificial intelligence in some ways is very similar to the brain. Artificial intelligence systems either switch or don't switch. The human brain cells either switch or they don't switch. It's very similar. But AI has the power of networking and can be enormous and can potentially be dangerous. If it really is intelligent and it's learnt itself and can potentially act against us, then there are dangers there, which Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk have alluded to, and we must be aware of that. I know Mark Zuckerberg has said, no, there's no dangers. He knows nothing, I have to say. He's a businessman who doesn't have a clue about it and is making profit out of it, and he doesn't want the profits to go down. It could be dangerous, and we have to be aware of that, and hence I see the ability to link with it as being, if you can't beat it, join it. Let's connect up directly with it and go ahead like that. So I see the combination as being the way of overcoming any problems that we might have.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor
Thank you.
Warwick. Big round of applause.
Thank you.
It was a fantastic presentation.